They called her the Lost Auntie. She was too quiet, too clumsy, and too ordinary for anyone to think she'd last in the military. But when the shooting test began, and the best of them started to fail, it was that simple woman who stepped forward, raised her rifle, and silenced everyone. Not by luck, but because she was the best sniper they'd ever had. Fort Benning, Georgia. The morning sun spilled over the dusty training grounds, casting long shadows of fresh recruits lining up in formation. Among them stood a woman who barely stood out, Emily Carter, 32 years old, her posture straight but her gaze lowered, her uniform a touch too worn, her boots clearly broken in by someone else's feet. She wasn't what anyone expected a soldier to look like. She had come from Helena, Montana, where she'd spent nearly a decade working as a librarian, guiding children through picture books, helping the elderly find Civil War memoirs, organizing shelves with quiet reverence. Life there was safe, routine. But after losing her father, a retired marksman and her quiet hero, something inside her shifted. She didn't enlist to escape. She enlisted because she wanted to become something he would have believed in. The others noticed her only in passing. "She's sweet," someone whispered. "Probably won't make it past the first month," said another. She carried a second-hand notebook filled with detailed notes in tidy cursive, training drills, field techniques, wind calculations, and equations scribbled like poetry. She rarely spoke, but she noticed everything: the way others aimed, how instructors breathed before calling a command, the slight twitch of a wrist before a misfire. Emily Carter wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't here to prove a point. But the silence around her was deceiving. Because while everyone else was talking, laughing, failing loudly, she was learning quietly and waiting. If Emily Carter was the silent observer, Sergeant Blake Torrance was the thunder that cracked the air. A decorated drill instructor with 3 tours overseas and a chest full of commendations, Sergeant Torrance walked the grounds of Fort Benning like a storm made flesh. His boots didn't just hit the dirt, they commanded it. His voice didn't echo, it cut. To him, the Army wasn't just a career. It was a crucible, and only those who could endure fire deserved to wear the uniform. He believed in dominance, not development. Pain made strength. Weakness? It was contagious. And Emily, quiet, soft-spoken Emily, was, in his eyes, a crack in the armor of his platoon. She didn't bark back. She didn't strut. She didn't break a sweat just to prove a point. To him, that wasn't humility. It was failure waiting to happen. He spotted her during morning drills, struggling to hoist herself over the wall. "Too polite for war," he scoffed under his breath. And once, when another recruit called her sweet, Torrance let out a sharp laugh. "Sweet doesn't survive combat," he muttered. "It bleeds first." He began to single her out, not to help her improve, but to expose her. Extra laps. Heavier packs. Sharper insults. Emily didn't argue. She didn't complain. She just wrote more notes in her battered notebook at night, while the barracks echoed with laughter and pain. What Torrance didn't see, what no one saw, was that under that quiet shell, a fire was forming. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, and it would burn through everything they thought they knew. The Georgia sun bore down hard that afternoon, as the recruits lined up at the firing range, sweat tracing down their backs beneath the weight of their gear. It was a rite of passage, their first live fire. Tension hung thick in the air, but for Emily, it felt heavier than for most. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the rifle's stock against her shoulder. The cold metal felt unfamiliar, foreign. She took a breath, held it, fired. Miss. Again. Miss. And again. Not even close. The echo of gunfire was quickly swallowed by a low ripple of laughter from the others. "Is the target invisible, Carter?" one recruit called out. "Maybe she's just warning the trees," another snorted. But it was Sergeant Torrance's voice that landed the hardest blow. He stood behind her, arms crossed, lips curled in disdain. "You're more likely to kill a tree than an enemy," he said, voice dry with sarcasm. "Maybe they'll send you to the forestry division." A few laughed harder. Emily didn't. She didn't argue, didn't flinch. Instead, she knelt down, opened her second-hand notebook, and began quietly recording the wind's speed. She looked at the angles of the range, the tree lines, the shimmer in the air that spoke of heat distortion. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was learning. Because while others chased bravado, Emily was building something slower, quieter. Something no one would see coming. Before the mockery, before the uniform, before Fort Benning, there was Montana. A quiet stretch of land outside Kalispell, where snow blanketed the fields in winter, and the only sounds came from the wind rustling through the pine. Emily Carter grew up here, beneath wide skies and alongside a man who spoke little but taught plenty. Her father, Jack Carter, a retired Marine and former competitive marksman. He never bragged, never forced. But every morning before school, he'd hand her a pair of binoculars and whisper, "Patience is louder than noise. The wind speaks. Listen." They'd track elk in the early hours, moving through the forest like shadows. Her small boots crunching on frost, his calloused hand resting gently on her shoulder. He showed her how to steady her breath, how to read the subtle sway of leaves for crosswind, how pressure on the trigger should feel like a whisper, not a command. And by the time she was 12, she could drop a tin can at 200 yards. But that was a different life, one she kept tucked away like a worn photograph. At Fort Benning, Emily didn't speak of Montana. Not to the instructors. Not to her bunkmate who snored 2 feet away. Because she knew something most didn't. It's not the loudest story that matters. It's the one that's earned its silence. And her silence was heavy with purpose. Long after the last round of push-ups, after the shouting fades and boots stop marching, the barracks settle into a hum of quiet exhaustion. Most recruits collapse into their bunks, grateful for the few hours of rest. But not Emily. She lingers behind, alone on the edge of the empty training field. Her notebook open under the pale yellow glow of a flickering overhead light. She doesn't just study, she dissects. Each night, she replays mental images of the day's misfires. She sketches angles, notes barrel temperature, and calculates bullet drift down to 1/10 of a millimeter. She even maps the terrain of the firing range, measuring how early morning fog affects visibility and how the slope shifts pressure distribution on a prone stance. She times the gusts, charts them, waits for patterns. One evening, as the clock nears midnight, the base janitor, Mr. Alvarez, a kind old veteran with a limp, shuffles past with his mop and bucket. He watches her for a moment, shaking his head with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Why are you doing all this, sweetheart?" They've already made up their minds. Emily looks up, a smudge of graphite across her cheek, her voice soft but steady. "Because I know I can. I just need a chance to prove it." Mr. Alvarez nods slowly, eyes glinting with something like respect. And then he leaves her to the silence. The kind of silence only someone truly focused can live inside. The sun blazes down on the concrete alleys of the mock urban drill village at Fort Benning. It's the kind of training designed to simulate the confusion of real combat. Smoke grenades, shouting, sudden sirens, and split-second decisions. Sergeant Torrance paces in front of the lined-up recruits, his eyes cold, scanning. Then he stops. Points a calloused finger. "Carter. Front and center." Emily steps forward, clutching her rifle a little tighter. The others exchange glances. Some smirk. "You've been scribbling in that little notebook of yours. Let's see if it's worth anything. You lead this run." Silence. Emily blinks, but doesn't flinch. Torrance nods toward the map of the course. "Objective, retrieve the intel. Avoid ambush. Don't get your squad killed. Good luck, librarian." The drill begins. Alarms blare. Simulated gunfire echoes between plywood walls. Recruits scatter. But Emily doesn't panic. Her breath steadies. She scans, notes the wind, the direction of movement, every sound, every flash. "Form wedge left. Cross cover. Move," she commands, her voice low but firm. She directs her squad through back alleys, signaling silent takedowns, flanking patterns she learned not from war movies, but from years tracking elk through the whispering forests of Montana. They bypass 2 ambush zones. Retrieve the intel packet. Get out clean. No casualties. When they return, the squad's faces are flushed with disbelief. A few even nod at her. Torrance watches, jaw tight, then shrugs. "Lucky guess," he mutters, already turning away. But for a flicker of a moment, just one, his eyes held something else. Unease. It started as a joke. One of the recruits set up tin cans and paper targets behind the barracks after hours. "Let's see who's actually got an eye," someone laughed. The informal shooting challenge quickly drew a crowd, off-duty soldiers with nothing to prove but pride. Sergeant Torrance showed up too, arms crossed, amused. It was his kind of scene, competition, pressure, no room for weakness. One by one, the recruits took their shots. Some hit close. A few missed wide. Laughter followed every miss, and the air smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and something unspoken, judgment. Then, from the edge of the group, a voice. "Can I try?" Heads turned. It was Emily, holding her rifle steady, her notebook tucked under one arm. A ripple of laughter broke out. Torrance raised an eyebrow, then gave a mock bow. Fine. Just don't cry when the kin mocks you back. Emily stepped forward. No swagger. No words. Just a breath, calm, measured. First shot. Crack. The tin can spun off its perch, hit dead center. Whispers started. Second shot. Crack. The paper target tore exactly through the bullseye. Silence. A third shot, optional, followed anyway, splitting a can clean in half. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the insects seemed to go quiet. Torrance's smirk faded, replaced by a twitch of his jaw. Somewhere behind her, a recruit muttered under his breath, stunned. That's not luck. Emily said nothing. She just lowered her rifle, turned, and walked away, like hitting bullseyes had always been a part of who she was. The next morning, word had already spread. By the time the official range test began, recruits lined up, not just to shoot but to watch. They weren't there for their turn. They were waiting for hers. Emily stood at the far end of the range, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed against the wind. The instructors added challenges, moving targets, varying distances, shifting gusts designed to mess with even the best shooters. It was meant to expose weaknesses. Emily treated it like math. She adjusted the scope, noted the wind flags fluttering at uneven rhythms. She took her time, calm, precise. Her breathing matched the slow beat of her focus. First shot. A moving target, bullseye. Second shot. High wind, far distance, bullseye. Third shot. 3 targets appeared simultaneously. Emily didn't flinch. She tracked, paused, and fired, 3 clean hits in under 10 seconds. By the 5th round, something changed. The usual murmurs died out. Instead, the recruits started clapping. Not out of politeness, but awe. Even the ones who'd chuckled at her quiet ways the week before were now elbowing each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. And then, Torrance. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smirking. He was just watching, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. Silent. Not out of contempt. Out of curiosity. And something else creeping in, respect. Emily didn't ask for recognition. She didn't need it. But in that moment, with dust settling at her boots and eyes locked on her from every direction, she had it. After the demonstration, the results weren't just impressive, they were record-breaking. Emily's name made its way to the clipboard of the Sharpshooter Evaluation Committee by noon. That committee didn't just evaluate shooters. They picked the best of the best, for elite missions, for protection details, for the face of the Army's future. Recruits gathered around her during chow. How long have you been shooting like that? One asked. Another offered a quiet, you were amazing. Emily gave nothing more than a soft nod. She wasn't used to attention. She didn't want praise. She just wanted to do what she was born to do. But not everyone celebrated. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Georgia tree-line, Sergeant Torrance called her aside. He didn't yell, didn't bark. This time, it was a low voice, edged with something that sounded almost like warning. Don't think one trick makes you a soldier. Emily stood still, boots rooted like they were part of the earth. She met his gaze, not defiantly but with unwavering calm. It's not a trick, she said. It's years of silence turning into precision. For a long moment, he didn't respond. His eyes searched hers, maybe looking for arrogance. But there was none, just a quiet, anchored strength he hadn't noticed before. He turned and walked off without another word. But his silence spoke volumes. He couldn't deny her anymore. Recognition had found her. But so had the resistance. And Emily Carter, former librarian, underestimated recruit, was ready for both. The final trial arrived on a cold, wind-lashed morning. Clouds rolled low over Fort Benning, casting a heavy gray over the shooting range. Rain spat sideways. The wind howled through the pine trees. It was the kind of day that made even seasoned shooters flinch. Recruits lined up, nervous energy buzzing through the air. They were told the trial would simulate real combat conditions, moving targets, variable range, unpredictable weather. No redos. No allowances. Emily stood at the far end of the line, calm. She didn't blink at the storm. Her fingers moved automatically, checking her sights, running calculations in her head like breathing. Wind speed, 14 miles per hour crosswind. Humidity rising. Temperature drop. Slight, but enough to affect trajectory. The first shooter missed 3 of 10. The next 5. Even the confident ones, the ones who'd mocked her weeks ago, were rattled by the wind and the cold. One recruit even failed to fire, paralyzed by nerves. Then came Emily Carter. She stepped forward like she belonged there. First target, 200 meters crosswind. Click. Bang. Hit. Second, moving silhouette at 350 meters. Bang. Hit. She moved fluidly, every shot a meditation. No hesitation. No theatrics. Just precision born from discipline and years of silence behind her father's rifle in the Montana woods. Shot after shot rang out, each one true. The instructors looked at each other. Was this a fluke? Was it luck? No. They knew what they were witnessing. By the end of her trial, the board flashed the results. 10 out of 10. Perfect. Final tally. Highest score recorded at Fort Benning in 5 years. Not a single word from Emily. Just a quiet breath and the faintest trace of a smile. The trial was over. Applause had faded. Commendations were handed out, and Emily stood off to the side, still in her same hand-me-down boots, still gripping the same worn notebook, though now stained with rain instead of ink. She wasn't basking in the glory. That was never her way. She was just still. Then the crowd parted, and Sergeant Blake Torrance walked toward her. The same man who once scoffed at her presence. The one who said sweetness wouldn't survive combat. His boots crushed gravel with each step, but his face, usually carved in stone, held something unfamiliar now. He stopped a foot away from her, looked her square in the eyes. No sneer, no smirk, no patronizing comment. Just silence, thick with meaning. Then finally he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You earned it," he said. Voice low, steady. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of her skill. It was an unspoken apology, a surrender of pride, and maybe a recognition of something deeper. That true strength doesn't always bark orders or puff its chest. Sometimes it wears second-hand boots and keeps its power tucked between silence and steel. Emily met his eyes unwavering. She didn't gloat, didn't rush the moment. Just a quiet smile. A respectful, "Thank you, Sergeant." He nodded again, this time softer, then walked away. The shift had happened. Not with a bang, but with quiet respect finally earned. 1 year later, the Georgia sun hangs low over Fort Benning, casting golden light over the familiar dirt paths and rifle ranges. A new batch of recruits fumbles through their first week, nervous, uncertain, and overwhelmed by the pressure. Among them stands a young girl, barely out of high school. She's small like Emily once was, her uniform still too stiff. Her eyes darting, afraid of messing up. Hands tremble as she raises the rifle for the first time. Behind her, a calm voice. "Breathe in. Count to 3. Let the wind guide you, not fight you." The girl startles slightly, turning her head. There stands Sergeant Emily Carter. Confident, composed, not loud or commanding like some, but something deeper, centered. She crouches beside the girl, gently adjusting her grip. There's kindness in her voice, but steel beneath it. "Don't worry. They didn't believe in me either," Emily says, her lips curled in a knowing smile. The girl takes a breath, holds it, fires. Crack. The shot slices through the stillness. Dead center. The girl gasps. Her eyes widen. She turns to Emily, stunned. Emily simply nods, a quiet approval. Around them, other recruits take notice, not of the shot, but of the woman beside her. The one whose name now carries weight, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. And as the wind picks up and the day moves on, Emily stands tall, not just as a soldier, but as a guide, a symbol, a quiet legend. The simple woman who once blended into the background, now lighting the path for those just beginning. Not every hero storms through the gates. Some walk in quietly, observing, learning, waiting for their moment. Emily Carter wasn't loud. She didn't fight to be seen. She simply let her precision speak louder than doubt. And in a world that often mistakes stillness for weakness, she proved that calm can be stronger than force, that softness can hold deadly aim, and that a simple woman can change everything. So the next time you see someone underestimated, the quiet one in the back of the room, remember Emily, and look again. If Emily's journey moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe. We share real and fictional stories that celebrate quiet power, resilience, and the people the world almost missed. Because sometimes the smallest voice holds the biggest truth, and we want you to hear it.